Hello, beautiful. And what I want to know is, what is really good in your life today? I'm Kia, and this is another episode of the Female Veterans Podcast. Today, I have a very cool guest with me, and it's not my normal guest, so bear with me. I have another one of the boys with me, one of our veteran brothers, and he is doing something really incredible for women veterans, so I brought him on here. Now, he is a former major in the United States Army, and he created an organization called Veterans Counseling Veterans, which you understand as a veteran. Nobody understands us like another veteran. So this is like really a critical organization. Not to mention, we met because he was, before this coronavirus time, going to have an event in which I was to speak at. And it was going to be my very second speaking event. And I was so excited, but coronavirus happened. And this important event was for and about military sexual trauma. And this is important work, right? So this amazing gentleman actually came and did my podcast before, and the episode sort of got messed up. Life happens. And he has graciously given me more time to talk about it. And actually everything happens for a reason, because now that Corona happened, we couldn't do the event. And we can still talk about it, and more people can hear about it and maybe attend when it's going to happen next year. So without further ado, I want to welcome Ellsworth. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Kia. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So tell me, what made you join the military?
Well, that's an interesting question, because the backdrop is my lived experience. My dad was in the military for 20 years, and I was a military dependent. Mm-hmm. And then my dad was about ready to retire in Wilmington, Delaware, and I just did not fit in with the civilian world. And so my only way out to get out of that was actually join the military. So I actually joined the military at the age of 17, a high school dropout, because I wanted to get away from the transition to the civilian world as a kid.
Wow. So what made you decide to join the Army out of all the branches?
Well, my dad. So, it's something I knew. It was something that I was very familiar with, because I grew up all over the world as a military brat, and so I was very familiar. Most of my friends, that kind of thing. You collect, most of your friends were in the military, were, kids in the military and that kind of thing. So it was just a natural thing for, go right straight to the Army.
Right.
And kind of continue the legacy of my dad.
I was just going to ask that. I was like, do you have other family members besides your dad that were in the military where it was sort of like a legacy, or is this his legacy you continued?
Yeah, well, we got the same name, so we really continue the legacy. My sister and my niece, they joined, and they didn't retire like I did, but they joined as well.
Oh, I love that they're female veterans. See,
yes.
I'm going to have them on the show. Send them to me. So tell me, what was boot camp like for you?
Wow. See, boot camp, I thought about it too, because I had a very embarrassing moment. When I went to boot camp, they confused me for another. My name was Ellsworth Williams, and they confused me with another guy named Alfred Williams. Alfred Williams already had 2 years of college, and because of that, he was going to be our acting platoon leader. And so but they confused him with me. So I was in a 2-man room, and then they found out their error, and here I am in formation, and they said, "Williams, you go into the back of the formation because you're a dummy. You didn't even finish high school."
No.
So I had to actually pack, and I had to go in and unpack my room, because it's a 2-person room, and go to the open bay. So that's how it kind of started for me. It's like, wow, what a introduction to the military.
Yeah, you paid for their mistake.
And it doesn't really, obviously, my life is different now, but back then I was like, wow, I'm a dummy.
Oh, that's so sad. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, clearly you're not a dummy. So how did you, how was active duty for you?
Well, like a lot of us, when I first went in the military, it was definitely not my intention of retiring from the military. Mm-hmm. I was just trying to get out of an environment that I was not comfortable with, and then I would, get out. And the only reason why I re-enlisted, because I really was not I did not plan on re-enlisting. I did not. And what they did was I had like a year left on my enlistment, and I was stationed in California, and they sent me to Germany. And I only had a year left. So when you're over there, you have no way of getting employment, no networking and stuff. So I had to re-enlist. So that to me was really, I felt like it tricked me. I'm like, really? So I joined, not because I wanted a career, but I said, okay, look, I don't know where I'm going to work. I'm not going to be out there homeless or whatever. So I joined the military, and that's why I continued to join the military at that time. It was an interesting experience. I had a lot of good leadership. In fact, there was a guy named Sergeant Stillwell, who was my first supervisor when I finished AIT, and he told me, he said, Tony, because that's my nickname, Tony, you're gonna get a GED. That's the number one thing. And I got my GED. And to fast forward, and now in that whole process, I also through the time I got an ROTC scholarship, got promoted, whatever. And when I got close to him, he's in Texas, I wouldn't visit him. And I was a commander at the time, so I gave him my commander's coin. And he was retired now. Sergeant Stillwell, he was Master Sergeant Stillwell at the time. And he didn't. He said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I just want you to know that because of your guidance, your leadership is where I'm at today because of you." I gave him my coin. So that was a really great moment for me to be able to go back and circle back and let that person know how they influenced my life.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I love that story. And you know what else? I wonder how many people were overseas and re-enlisted because they didn't know what they were going to do.
I think it's a tactic. I really believe it's a tactic, Kia. I really do. When I thought I was angry. I said, I can't understand it. I got like a year left. Why are you going to send me over? They say, well, when you finish up, you'll come back. That was their thing. So I definitely think it's one of the tactics. And I think it's also a tactic when they want you to retire. So if they, if you're already retired, past retirement, and then somebody tell you you're going to go to Germany or Korea, you probably drop your paperwork. So I think it's a tactic on both sides.
Good to know. That's interesting. So I want to know, what was the biggest obstacle you faced while you were serving?
So you remember, and I said earlier that I started enlistment, I did 8 years enlistment. And then I was awarded an ROTC scholarship. I won it, whatever I competed for, and I got it. And so I've got my obstacles are on both sides. So as enlisted, my biggest obstacle, again, which is interesting, that my other sergeant tried to prevent me from getting the scholarship. And because I was stationed somewhere else, and when that news came down that I got it, he held on to it. He never let me know that I got the scholarship. Wow. And it was just the grace of God that I found out, because he and my other sergeant, my supervisor, were all both on leave. So I was curious about the results. So I said, let me call them. No, you wouldn't call them. You just go to your NCR and that would be it. But since they were not there, I called myself specifically on a Monday. And they said, oh yeah, you've been accepted, but you have to do 3 things for it to become completed. And this is a Monday. And do you know, I got all that stuff they needed, physical and everything, by Friday. And I was in Fort Dix, and I was going up the elevator, and this sergeant was yelling at me about me going past the chain of command. And I told him, I said, Sergeant, next time I will be part of the chain of command.
I love that. Next time I'm going to be part of the chain of command. What?
You know what? I'm going to give you the period of that conversation with that Sergeant Stillwell. Because it just so happens, because this was in Texas, it just so happened that same sergeant, he's now the sergeant major of I was a veterinary food inspector. He was now the sergeant major of the veterinarian corps. Mm-hmm. And I went and visited him, and he didn't recognize me. And he jumped up and went to attention, right, to salute me. And I said, hey, Sergeant Major Newman, do you recognize me? So it was kind of like an interesting to go to him and say, boom, close this door, and then go to the Sergeant Stillwell and say, thank you very much. So both of them had a piece. So that was a big challenge. To the grace of God, if God did not expose that to me, I would have never known, and I would have just continue on as a enlisted person.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
That is incredible. And you know what? I call that divine justice. When you're like, do you recognize me? You remember me? And what? That is divine justice.
Right,
It's, that's actually, a beautiful contrast of you being able to give, to go and see someone who impacted and empowered your life, and then someone who tried to hold you back from that empowerment.
Who tried to hold it back.
Yeah, that's incredible. Wow. You see? What happens to the boys too? Stuff will be happening, but it's just different than what happens to us girls sometimes. Actually, sometimes the same, because I had a guest not too long ago. And oh my gosh, Jennifer, she is incredible. She wrote this book, and she served just after Vietnam. And she told me a lot of stories about how stuff was going on where they would try to just do manipulative tactics to hold people back, like kind of what happened to you. And from her perspective, it was girls, and they would be young women who wouldn't know any better, and she have to educate them. Like, girl, this is not how that works. This is how it's supposed to work. You're being cheated, And so it's interesting to see that this is kind of what happened to you. You would have been cheated, if it wasn't for the grace of God, really.
Yep. Only him.
So lucky thing. And so what was it like? What was like the biggest difference you would say from being enlisted to being an officer?
I could tell you something, boy. I tell you, and I don't know how I made it as officer. They're more cutthroat. The racial diversity is ridiculous. When you're enlisted, it's not unusual to come across another race or something that you're platoon leader, platoon sergeant, whatever. Mm-hmm. When you come commissioned, it really, it shrinks down to like 10%. Wow. So there was a lot of times where I just didn't fit in, and I would, they would have my wife, and when I was married at the time, we lived in Germany. We had a housing complex where everybody was on the same row, all the officers on the same row, and I would see them go over to one person. They would pass my house to go to another person's house, and you can look out your window and see them all in a together having a party, whatever. And they never invited us. Wow! And a lot of times I was only because I was military intelligence, so a lot of times I was only African American, like in the whole battalion. Yeah. So and then when you have families, you see there's certain things that you can kind of deal with as a military person. But when you have a family, that's when it's kind of harder, because you got to kind of explain to them, what's going on. So that I think was the biggest. They're so cutthroat as an officer that when we do our rating, the commander can only give, there's a thing called one block, 2 block, and 3 block. The 1 block is reserved for the superchargers, right? Super guys, self people. And you're only allowed to give 10% as a commander. You can only give 10% away. And everybody's trying to cut each other down because they want that 10%. Because usually it means 3 out of the whole battalion of 25 captains or lieutenants. They're only going to get 3 of them will get top block. And ththose guys guys and women are going to be, battalion commanders, brigade commanders, or whatever. And so you knew. So they were very cutthroat. I felt the officers back then were very cutthroat versus NCO. The NCO, like it's just like if we fall back, we're all going to come back and pick you up and take you away. I felt like the officer boy, not only will they're the ones that would trip you and run past you. Okay,
wow,
that's how I felt. Like it wasn't just like, hey, I can run faster than you. If they saw that you were ahead of them, they would trip you and run past you.
So drama, so mad drama.
Yeah, I didn't like. I didn't really like. Again, there was a whole different. I guess if I came in as an officer, I probably wouldn't know the difference. Mm-hmm. But because I did 8 years enlisted, my dad, of course, was enlisted for all those years. I could really see the difference when it comes to officers enlisted. When it comes to that.
So, how did you overcome it?
God, because God, because I was an NCO in an officer's body, right, and that's not good. Mm-hmm. So I'll be telling a lot of those guys, lieutenants and captains. I'm like, shoot, I got more time grade than you, than whatever. My boots older than you, that kind of thing. They ain't like hearing that from a lieutenant or whatever. So I was mouthy. NCO, because I felt like I was more of an NCO than I was an officer. So shoot, I had no problem talking whatever it was back in there, whatever. And I felt like when you're an officer, especially my rank, you were supposed to be submissive. Mm-hmm. And submission was not really in my DNA. So, if somebody was higher ranking than you as an officer, I'm talking about, you were never supposed to challenge them or make them look bad or anything like that. Unlike an NCO, NCO, shoot, whatever, like like a drill sergeant said, you got to beat me. You got to beat me. You beat me, then you top dog. But as an officer, it wasn't like that. You had to be a lot more submissive, even up to the general officer's rank. If you're a 1-star general and you're in a room with 2 and 3 stars, it's that 1-star general that's got to get the coffee. So even up in the general officer work is still that way. So that was a difficult for me to try to for 16 years in military intelligence to try to still sustain myself in that world there. But I did, through the grace of God, only through the grace of God.
Wow. That's really incredible. I mean, I guess I sort of imagine could be like that, but just to hear it, just envision how cutthroat it must have been, and then the racial divide, and then that's especially poignant, I think, with everything that's going on in the United States right now, and all of these this awareness that is trying to make its way to the forefront through these peaceful protests and some of, even with the unfortunate riots, but either way, honestly, it's a necessary conversation. And I will be interested to see how this impacts the military, because we know that there can be a lot of racial and sexist and, homophobic and all sorts of issues that exist within the military, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're real good at covering them. Now, there are articles out there about the racial disparities. There's a recent article last week where it's an Air Force article where they were saying that the African American airmen were disproportionately punished, and even though they make up a less, because each branch has its own share of minorities, and the Army has the most, and then the Marines and the Navy have the least.
Right.
So even that, they recognize that, but they keep it more close hold, and I think it's more controlled, because there are so many people out there looking out for you, especially on the NCO side of the house. There are so many people out there looking out for you that it's harder to do in the military world than in the civilian world. It's easier from the officer side because if the NCO, if I wanted to get if they're going to rate me for PT, if I got 290 and above, I'm good at excellent, right? But in the officer world, it's very subjective, and most of your write-up is subjective. So when you have something subjective, you have a better chance of biases to be creep in and be part of the report. So that's so it's a different thing. West, you look at the demographics of the academies. It's kind of crazy. The demographics. So anyway, I don't want this to change to a whole new topic, but it's going to be interesting. To see how they navigate it, if no one really discussed them, or whatever. You may not hear anything.
Yeah, it's true. But definitely it's a topic of discussion that needs to be had. And hopefully big military, the Department of Defense, will begin to consider these things. It is a very relevant, I think, topic at the moment. So I'm glad we discussed it a bit. So give me your favorite active duty story. I'd be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, I think when I went to the first war, the first Gulf War, and the reason why it's my favorite is it's that that's when I felt we were the closest, we were the most unified when we were out fighting each other and stuff. And people don't understand, what the American flags mean until you're over there and you're fighting underneath it. You really understand what that means. And I'm telling you, when those Iraqis saw us come, they knew there was some problems. Okay, it was that kind of fear just seeing us.
Wow.
And they started running. So the war for me was the best because I got a chance. We weren't. The outside world, the media, nothing like that was part of our world. It was just us, and we relied on each other. and that's where it is when you go to war. It just unifies you. So I know that sounds kind of sad, but I think my most memorable is when it is the wartime. There's some sad parts when we lose somebody, and you know their family, and you got to go back. That sucks. So there's a sucky part there. Mm-hmm. But I think my most memorable moments was when I was in the war. I wouldn't say it's the funnest, but it was my most memorable, where I felt really connected to everybody that was around me.
Well, there's the mentality of completing the mission and the teamwork. Yep.
And the team, absolutely.
And when you're in an environment like that, like, I just want to say that I even as a veteran, my heart always just goes out to the civilians anywhere that we have to go and do our work, right? Because they're just sort of in that area and we have to go do our job. And it has to, I always just feel sad for them, you know, but at the same time, I also realize that, you know, for us as the military, we're going in there to do a job. We're following our orders. And there is, of course, that brotherhood and sisterhood that occurs during a time like that when you're under a lot of stress. Because it's wartime. You're under stress. You've got to do a mission and you've got to rely on these people. So that connectivity is, I didn't serve during wartime. I actually came in at the very end of that first Gulf War. So I am actually a wartime veteran, but I came in when they were calling the troops back.
When they're coming back, yeah.
Uh-huh. So 1994. So I definitely can understand though how that, because just being in the military gives you that sense of being mission oriented and being, you know, a brotherhood, sisterhood type of energy, you know, but actually going in a time of wartime, I can imagine the bonds that creates. My heart always just breaks for the civilians of anywhere we have to go to do that work. So
there's a downside.
Yeah, definitely. That's the downside. So tell me, what was your transition out of the military like?
Well, that's interesting too, because it's like I retired and I felt like I really wasn't ready to retire, but God kind of pushed me out. Mm-hmm. Because I was going to get married in September, and I came down on orders to go to Iraq. That August 29th, I got my orders. Mm-hmm. And well, actually, it was a warning order that hey, Tony, you're about ready to go to Iraq, so get ready to say goodbye to your, you know. And I was going to be married next month, but I already had 20-something years, and I had more than enough years to retire. But when they said I was going, and I told my wife, you know, I'm crying, you know, I'm upset because because it's my second marriage. I did not want to mess up again. The military had a lot to play with that. I got some part of it, but they got a lot to play with it too. Mm-hmm. So I said, oh my goodness, my wife's a police officer too. She could have picked anybody, but she picked me. And I went to her and said, if you still marry me, I am going to retire as soon as, because you know, you just can't resign. You got to retire. You got to go do the mission and retire. So I said, if you still marry me, I'm going to retire when I finish this tour. She said, I'll still marry you. That was a Friday. Monday, I got the total orders, and the orders the first paragraph had 500 names. And it said, everybody pack yourself, put it in the storage, see you in a year and a half. And the second paragraph had one name, and it was Ellsworth Williams Major. And it says, you're going to go to Belvoir, have your own place, your own car. It was like, wow. And because they assumed me, because most time when you go, they don't assume your records and stuff. But because this was special orders, they actually assumed my command. And the reason why it's important, I was able to put my paperwork in to retire while I was serving with those guys. So by the time I finished that event, that's 6 months, they tried to put me another deployment, but I said, but I've already got my orders right here to retire. So that was God, because all that really set things up. It forced me to leave, because I wanted to stay in. It forced me to leave, and then by me being in that command, they had the authority to cut my orders to retire. So I couldn't get touched by my other unit out of Fort Knox.
Wow.
So that's that kind of another one of those God moments where he's in there saying, "Tony, it's time to get out." Well, you're not listening. You're not listening. Okay, here's some orders. So
now you gotta listen. You got orders.
now you gotta listen. Yeah, but it's a good scare. It wasn't like, "Oh my God, they're gonna get beat." It was like a scare that then Monday I'm like, "Okay, thank you, God." you didn't. I could have easily been paragraph 1.
So what was it like for you once you became a civilian initially?
So what I did was, because I had my degree and stuff like that, so I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I said, you know what, maybe I'll try to do some teaching, and I could become a substitute teacher, and I got all kind of trouble with that. That don't work. I had these little third graders, and I was a substitute, so they really pulled the wool over my eyes. Told me they had no homework and all that crap, and I believed them. And I found out right before the class ended that they were pulling the wool over my eyes. So I had them all in the front leaning rest position, all these little kitties. And those teachers were having a hard attack. They're like, this guy got PTSD. What's wrong with him? So
I am major pain.
Major pain. What is wrong with this guy? Help our kids. And so I kind of figured, okay, that's probably not going to be my thing. And then my wife, who was actually was a police officer, and she was in charge of the domestic violence unit where I was at in New Jersey. And I said, well, let me. And they had a civilian volunteer response team. So let me sign with that. Maybe that way we have a connection. We can have things we could connect it to, And that's what got me in the counseling world. Because then when I did the response team, I would get the victim, the survivor, the time would come and they had to talk to us and we, fill out the paperwork and whatever. But they said you couldn't do anything. I always used to be in the military, so I wanted to help them. They said, no, it's not your job to help them. You gotta have the degree in counseling or whatever. So that's when I decided, you know what? I'm gonna use my post 9/11 GI Bill and get a degree in counseling. So that was another one of those God moments. Yeah, but teaching was the first one, but that didn't work out at all.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, my first couple of attempts at life after the military didn't work out at all. So I can vibe with that. It's an adjustment. It takes a little time to find your footing, I think, and to get going in the right direction.
It really is.
And so what made you create Veterans Counseling Veterans?
So, again, I got lots of God moments. And I only say the God moments like I'm some evangelist finished on the hilltop or mountaintop. Because it's so obvious, And so I'm in counseling. And now, before you finish your degree, you got to get an internship. And my wife just retired from the police force. And she says, Tony, as my present, I want an RV, right? And I want to move around the world. And I looked at her, I said, for my whole life, I've been moving around. So I'll tell you what, honey, you go with the RV and then every now and then I'll come visit wherever you at. Okay. She said, so God heard me. He said, oh, there you go again. There you go again. So God heard me. And I got a phone call from James A. Haley, VA here in Tampa. They says, are you still interested in doing an internship at the VA? I said, yeah, sure. And while I was doing it, my wife checked out the RV campsite, which I'm at right now. I'm still standing on it. Staying at the RV campsite. My wife saw the RV camp, said, Tony, look, we can, because she bought the RV, and that's how she is. She said it Monday, she got it was Jesus, John the dang light was, Friday with the dang RV. So that's how she is. She says that she means it. So she researched it, said that the Big Deal has a great campsite, and that's when I say that to give you the context. So while I was there, I was in a suicide prevention team, and I noticed, and this people got to understand about a lot of these doctors in the VA, especially the psychologists and the psychiatrists and stuff, get be careful about. They're not used to our kind of language. So when I was there, the psychologists and psychiatrists did not like the language, so they would give them to me. And, we had a good time, right? We have a good time. Because that's how we talk, right? But these guys, remember, these guys are, most of these guys going to whatever these colleges and UCF and USF and, psychologists and whatever. So they're not used to somebody talking like we do. And I said, you know what? We could do this. When I say we can do this, I meant veterans can do this. I said, why not? And I also realized that there were over 30-something counselors in that VA, and only 2 of them were veterans. Wow. So I said, you know what? We can do this. I said, it'd be Veterans Counseling Veterans. That's how I started. That kind of crazy way. So I started working at the VA, or, interning at the VA, and that was in 2014. Yep, April 2014 when I founded Veterans Counseling Veterans.
That's amazing.
And
And
on the back of my T-shirt, our shirt we have, it says, "We take care of our own." I have a boots. It's like boots, and it says, "We walk in your boots. We take care of our own." So that was our model back then.
oh, I love that. That's beautiful and needed, and so
Yeah.
so needed. What's your team like for the organization?
Well, this is funny because I was in a counseling field, that meant I had a lot of licensed counselors and that kind of stuff. So it's almost like having somebody says, "I don't do windows." So I have all these PhDs and licenses and stuff like that, and they love doing. That's why this podcast is so perfect, because they don't mind doing little counseling stuff, but they don't like doing the windows, which I mean, the budgeting and the marketing. And
Right.
Don't do windows. I am Doctor So-so. I don't do windows. So the hardest part of my nonprofit is that I had a lot of what I call special team players, but no actual team. No actual. Everybody wanted to be the quarterback, and nobody wanted to be the lineman and stuff. So that has been the hardest part of the nonprofit, is that. So I got, if you say teams, and one of the things we do is network. We got a network of veterans and spouses of veterans who are counselors. So whatever you need, I have somebody that can do that. So that's that team. The team I'm working on now is the day-to-day operation team. That's harder, because that kind of stuff you need to pay people, right?
Yes.
We want to get paid. Now that sounds good, but I want to get paid, kind of like that.
Yeah, I feel that. Who don't want to get paid these days?
Yeah, they got to, because less than 18% of people who are in the military actually retire. The rest of the people got to make money. They got to pay their bills.
Yes.
So even though I love you, Tony, I love my veterans, but I got to get paid. So so that's, I think my team is not like it's growing now. It's getting crazy now. So I've got a similar sort of team, but not there yet where we're like a functional team. So again, I have a whole bunch of, if you want somebody who's, you'll see in this podcast coming up, if you want somebody who's an expert in MST, I got him. You want somebody who's expert in suicide, I got him. TBI, whatever, I got him.
That's beautiful. And so if I wanted to get services with you, how would I do that?
So that's another thing. So I'm not, so to get services, and I hate the word service, because we're not actually a service provider. We're a network.
Right.
So basically, and right now it's word of mouth. So somebody would say, I'm a combat veteran, I'm not having a good time. I'm not thinking you guys are feeling me, understanding me, and blah, blah. And then somebody would say, well, you've heard of Veterans Council of Veterans? Call them. And that's how I do it. It's word of mouth. I'm not pushing it. I'm not trying to make a big business out of this. It's just a network here. It's mostly in Tampa and Orlando area. So that's how people find out. People find out maybe from somebody else. And then what I do is I connect them. So, and including families. So if you're a combat veteran, I can connect with a combat veteran. MST, I connect with somebody who got expertise in MST, whatever it is, I can connect you. And that's that's the one way. The suicide is another one. We just one of the things we created was called Veterans and Families Outreach Support for Suicide Survivors, VIVAS. And what that is that's a support group of people, families who lost veterans to suicide. And then we go as a task force. And so we always get a good word of mouth. So we just had somebody invite us to their funeral, their son's funeral on the 20th. He died on 25th of May, Memorial Day. And they contacted us Tuesday. And we sent out a team that included me, two other, and he was Navy, two other Marine peers, and one survivor. And then what will happen is that the survivor, she lost her son, a Marine, to suicide 3 years ago. So the survivor would go and communicate with the parents. And then we would go out there and fan out and communicate with the people there, because we have a high rate of veterans dying by suicide once it happens within their ranks. It's called a contagion. So we go out there talking to them and giving them a card and stuff, and all of our stuff are free, waive whatever. So if there's any kind of counseling, whatever, we will provide it for free, and we'll get somebody from our network that will provide that. So we just had a guy named Giovanni Cuevas, Navy corpsman, and he just passed. I don't know, when somebody dies on Memorial Day, that normally tells me that they're trying to send a message.
Yes.
And I don't know what that message is, but to choose that day means you were trying to say something.
Yes. I agree with that. And it's just heartbreaking. I mean, especially we know that the female veteran suicide rate is raising. It's one of the fastest growing rates in the United States for suicide. And it just veterans in general. And it's a problem. It's really a silent epidemic that's happening that no one is taking note of except us. Right?
Yep. That's why I did an MSC conference. Exactly why. Because I was because I wanted to do a year-long event, a campaign for suicide, and I don't know how it happened. It's a God thing, I guess. But I noticed that women veterans had twice the rate of suicide than the non-veterans counterparts.
That's right.
And the primary reason was military sexual trauma.
Yes.
I said, well, why did I not know about this? Because you're right, no one's talking about it. Right. And so I said, the MST. That's what the biggest focus on the MST was. That conference was to find out. What services and resources are out there and why. I wanted to put a spotlight on that. And now with this podcast, now I can do it all the time. So yeah, you're right. I don't know why. I don't know if it's I don't know. I don't know why it's not being covered. The media's not covering it.
Oh, don't get me started. Because, I'll be like, when it comes down to using veterans for political theater, we are all over the news. But if it's a real serious issue that really affects us and affects our lives and our families, then there's nobody saying nothing about nothing. And I will tell you, we have this in common. The reason why you're on this podcast right now, and it even exists in the first place, is because I read an article about the suicide rate being so much higher than for civilian counterparts, and that it was increasing so rapidly, and I was like, wow, I think the number was like 250%. And I was like, that's insane. And I was outraged. And that's how this journey began for me. And then I read more and found out it had a lot to do with military sexual trauma. And I was thinking, I was like, when I served, I had a good experience until the day I didn't. And I saw a lot of things that maybe removed a lot of my, let's say, naivete and idealism for the world as a young 18-year-old, 19-year-old girl. And while I was serving, and I thought, well, you know what? If I have this story, I wonder what other women, what are their experiences like? And you know what else? The prevailing perception of veterans are still men. So I was also told by an outreach coordinator at the Vet Center in LA, in Culver City, that if I wanted to really do something for female veterans, to give them a voice, because of that perception that the females don't get donations, so they don't get the donations the men get. So then when they go out to do their outreach work, the women have to take what's left after the men. And I thought, oh my God, like, why aren't we talking about this? And so it really bolstered my passion to get the information out there so that people can understand that we are veterans, that we have a suicide crisis, that we are facing military sexual trauma. These things are happening. There are good stories. People have great experiences in the military, and also there are the ones that don't. And this is how their lives are impacted after serving. Right. So it's real. It's a lot of why I created this podcast, to shine that light on our stories, good or bad. And so I love that we're going to do the military sexual trauma conference, the panel. And so tell me, what's the story with that? Well, I know that it's been postponed, but what are your plans going forward?
So when I created, and one of the reasons why I created this podcast, I'm not, I'm an introvert, right? And I really don't like being on whatever. I really hate it. In fact, when I finish, I'm so exhausted. I gotta sleep for 2 days. But I didn't want the moment to get wasted. So I said, what I've done is I've taken those panels, several of those panels, and I actually had podcasts on them. I've had 2 episodes, and each of the panels, the panels, so they're different. Mm-hmm. And I plan on having an episode a month just on military sexual trauma, kind of to address some of the things we were going to address in the conference right now on this podcast. And so that's my intent now, is just to keep keep it going, keep the momentum going, don't let it die. And then so once this COVID virus, getting control of the COVID virus goes by, I want to try to bring it back. If I, hopefully, keeping all those guys engaged and it grows, whatever. So that's my intent.
That's beautiful. So let me backtrack. You've mentioned the podcast a few times. Let's talk about that. So how did the podcast come to life?
It's interesting too, because like I said, Kia, I'm a big time introvert and everything else. So I must have every month I've been accumulating equipment, right? Just keep accumulating, but I just couldn't take that leap. And I had a lot of support, lots of support. And I went to this pod fest they had in Orlando before the COVID really hit.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt the only thing that makes me an extrovert is when I'm fulfilling a need. I come out of my shell for that. I will come to a type A or extrovert for a short period of time. And so I said, you know what? Yeah, it's very short. It's got a long shelf life when I do come up. I says, I get exhausted. I go in the corner and then cuddle up and nothing after I finish talking for an hour. But so that pushed me. I had all the equipment I did. In fact, I had more than enough equipment. And I spoke a lot about it as well. So that's what pushed me. I said, you know what? I can't go out there I can't have this conference. I can't have an impact, but the podcast can, because people who are in their houses still listen to each podcast. So that pushed me to the podcast, and I titled it Veteran Suicide, the Local Solution, because my belief was that suicide is a national problem, but has a local solution. Mm-hmm. And that local solution is the community. It's like, suicide is so personal. I always say you can't franchise it, you can't monopolize it, and you can't nationalize it. Mm-hmm. It's too personal. And that's why we're having a hard time now. Everybody wants to get involved in it or national. Yeah, and it's like even though the VA don't like this, it's like the 411. I said, well, 411, I call 411 for a crisis. So if my house is on fire, do I call a national 411 or do I call the local fire department?
Right.
And that's what we got to get past that we got to get more of the community involved when it comes to veteran suicide prevention, intervention, and post-vention. And that's what the podcast is about. It's about trying to bring the community, trying to identify the resources of the community, blah, 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 blah. So that's why it's called veteran suicide. But it's not always suicide. Sometimes, like I had a family podcast. It's called Veterans and Military Families during the COVID period. So I had a family podcast for that. Then I had a special needs one because I knew that there's a lot of family members out there that have a special needs child, especially autistic, but what's happening to them during COVID. So mm-hmm. I have that. So it's not just always suicide. I'll always bring in some other things that I think that are significant issues in the military and veteran community.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of different really interesting episodes that will be beneficial for everybody to see. Because your podcast is actually a video cast, so you can watch it. You don't have to just listen. You can watch it.
It's every Monday at 6:30 on Facebook. We actually broadcast through Zoom, mm-hmm. and then connect to Facebook, to our page.
That's amazing.
That's how we get it. It's like, so this Monday is going to be women veterans, and so you're going to actually hear. And I always tell them, I want to be authentic. I want them to talk about, on that podcast, you have women veterans. And if this is the crazy part of so when you talk to them, or if you talk to me, you better talk to me like I'm a man. Okay, because I am not a kid. I already have my career. So that's the interesting part that when you tell me you're an intern, they say, oh, but then they say, but I was a major in the Army or Air Force or colonel or whatever. So it's always interesting when you see that when you see the professors have to talk different when they talk to us. So I said, I tell them, no, I'm paying you, okay? So you're not cutting class short. Or I'm paying you, okay? The money's coming out of my pocket to pay you. So you better answer my phone call, okay? Answer my freaking phone call. So it's like that. Because, when you're a kid, you don't think about who's paying it. Hey, it's time to go. Oh, you only got half a day. So, you run out and you got half a day. Shoot, I'm paying for that. No, hold up. If I ask somebody to do a maintenance in my car, you ain't leaving early. You better fix my car.
That's right.
You. So our mentality is a lot different.
Yes.
When you're retired or something, or military, you're a lot more mature, and you're not, and you don't want people to treat you as a baby or a kid. We're not kids.
That's right. So, I love that you're doing this podcast, and I love that you have all these great people coming on. And now I have one more question for you before we wrap it up. What advice would you give to the female veterans that are listening today?
You know, it's interesting because I look at these things that, and I see it even as African Americans and that kind of stuff, that when you have a women's veterans thing, it eliminates a lot of people who may or may not be, who can, so you got to make sure that you understand that there are people out there who may not be the same gender, who are still in your corner. So you got to put a way where it's not, exclusive. Like, women only. Sometimes I joke because sometimes I want to put on my deer hat and, be like Tyler Perry just so I can go to some of your meetings. So how you doing, But, it's an exclusive club, whatever like that. But we just got to be careful that we don't seem like we pushing people away as we're trying to get this unity. Because, again, there are a lot of us, and including the African American community, there are a lot of other races out there that really are supporting us, that want to support us. So when we sit there and say black only, then it really pushes out a lot of people who can't help you. You just shut them out. So I just say that be careful on how you do things, and then if you have a women's thing, have an event or two that's going to include all genders, so it doesn't seem like it's just a closed off and this is our girls club thing. So that's my recommendation. They may not like it, but that's what I would recommend to them is that.
Well, I will tell you this. The Female Veterans Podcast, the way it's named, is sort of a play on words. Because I'm a female veteran and it's my podcast and I'm a female. Right. So it is for women, but I always say, and you'll hear me say this a lot of times, and this is why I have men on my show as well. But I always say that it's more than just for female veterans. Everybody should listen to it because what you hear here is really insightful and beneficial and helpful. And I always say, if I can just help one person, be that a woman or a man or transgender or anyone, race, color, creed, whatever, then I've done my job. So I appreciate your advice. And now tell me, I know I said one more question, but I lied. This is my last question, I promise.
Okay.
Where can we find you if we want to connect with you, Ellsworth?
So we're on so again, we're on Facebook. So, and in fact, I have a group just for veterans and dependents of veterans and counseling. So if you're a veteran or a spouse of a veteran or even a dependent of a veteran and you're in mental health, you're invited to our page. So you got to go look up Veterans Counseling Veterans Group, and we have over 500 members that can help mentor, network, and collaborate with each other. So I got that special group just for that. Then I have my business page, which is Veterans Counseling Veterans Inc. INC. That's another good place, and that's one way you'll be able to look at some of our video casts. And we have a website called vetscounselingvets.org. And then for Twitter we got Vets Counseling Vets, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. So I got a lot of social platforms. So I'm on LinkedIn, or we're on LinkedIn too, but it's under my name, Ellsworth Williams, and LinkedIn, and the business come underneath there. So any one of those social platforms, you can find us.
That's amazing. And I will, of course, as everybody knows by now, put all the links in the show notes in the description of the episode so that if you want to follow Ellsworth and Veterans Counseling Veterans and check out his podcast/videocast, then everything will be there for you, of course. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up. And I want to just say thank you so much, Ellsworth, for coming back, hanging out with me for another hour and getting to talk about your story and even more stuff I didn't ask you last time, if you didn't notice that, and just sharing your insight and your experience. And it's been really amazing. So thank you.
Thanks, Kia. Thank you for having me on.
And so you guys, I just want to tell you, thank you again for listening, for always being so super supportive of this show. Come and check out theveteranschannel.com, where my new show, Women Warrior Stories, will be premiering really soon in the next couple of weeks. And you know where to follow me. And thank you. I love you guys. And I'll talk to you next time.